Hello, students, 8B Civics in Action students. This is Mr. McGravy. This is episode 3 of Civics in Action with Mr. McGravy, and it is going to be a really, really fun one today. I think you're absolutely going to love it. My guests today are your state representatives representing North Andover, State Representative Christina Minicucci and State Representative Trom Nguyen. Representative or Christina, can you want to say hello to the 8B students?
Hello, 8B. It's nice to see you virtually anyway. We just had some challenging let's connect to the internet issues. So we feel your pain being back to school in the virtual mode. My son had the pleasure of being in 8B last year, so I got to know Mr. McGravy very well throughout the year, both as a parent and as a state rep. And you guys are set up to have a great year. He makes civics super fun. And he's rolling with the punches with these with this virtual world of COVID, and he keeps it fun anyway. My son, it was the only class he wanted to go to last year. That's an indication. So you're set up for a good year this year.
Thanks, Christina. And Trom, welcome to Civics in Action. So glad that you're here for this season.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Hello, 8B. Echoing Representative Minicucci, you are in for a treat. I know that this is the second year where he's running this pilot program, and so you are making history as we know it. And so we're excited to talk to you about civic engagement and how to get people more politically involved. And just so you know, I'm in front of Rep Minicucci's house, and she's in the back of her house. We're truly so I look forward to answering your questions and getting to know you better. Let's get going.
Great, thank you very much. So, students, Representative Trom broke out a little bit, but she was just saying that her and Christina were actually at the farmers market in North Andover. Big shout out to the farmers market in North Andover. And they were running behind a little bit, and they came in a little late, and they decided to do a socially distanced episode. So they're both actually at Christina's house, completely socially distant on 2 different computers. So this is a very cool way to go about this. So students, Christina and Trom both actually were able to come in live for the Civics in Action talks last fall and winter. Unfortunately, we can't do those, so we're going to keep these going virtually. And they were here, and when we began the talks, they each got I gave them a series of icebreaker questions. So I'm going to just kind of give them an icebreaker question before we get into today. And the icebreaker question is going to kind of ask them, for some people, this was a great time in their life. For some people, it's a deep, dark place. But I'm going to take them both to 8th grade. I'm going to take them both back to 8th grade. I know my 8th grade wasn't the best year, but, you know, that's a completely different thing. I know State Representative Christina went to NAMS just like I did. She's a NAMS alumni, and we can talk more about Trom. But my question for an icebreaker is, it's pretty simple. What were you into when you were in 8th grade? Like bands, clothes, sports, hobbies, entertainment, extracurricular activities? Just and we'll start with Christina. Just give me one thing that you were into, Christina.
Well, this will be very amusing to anyone who knows me today, but I really liked clothes when I was in 8th grade.
Wow.
As a person who now is not known for my fashion sense, in 1988, it was Esprit and Benetton were really popular, and I really liked that. But I also played softball. I really liked softball, and I still actually really like softball. So between those, this is great. You'll understand this, Mr. McGravy, but I had a double tape deck. So what I really liked to do is get my tape deck. You guys might not know what this is, but I had my tape deck ready with record and pause. And so I'd listen to the radio. My favorite songs came on. I would unpause it and tape my favorite songs, because before the world of Spotify and on-demand music, you used to have to wait for your favorite song on the radio and then tape it if you were really lucky to catch it. So I used to like to do that and make mixtapes of my favorite music on the radio.
And thanks for that history lesson, because man, I could totally remember Benetton and the Benetton store and the Benetton models. Kids, you might want to look that up. Benetton. It was a real deal. And then of course the tape deck, you know, boombox, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
I can totally identify with that. Trom, you know, just tell us a little bit about your 8th grade. Just, you know, one thing that you were into that you remember.
So wait, that is quite amazing to me, because I know I'm in my 30s and I always make fun of Christina for being a whole decade older than I am. So I did the tapes as well. And so I guess, you know, technology didn't really improve that much when I was in 8th grade. But I was also very athletic back then. Not that I could say that about myself now, but I was getting ready to, you know, training to get into the varsity tennis team in high school. So I was training a lot for tennis. And but back in my day, you know, music was huge too. We had the Backstreet Boys, we had NSYNC. So the kids might have to look those up as well.
Trom, can you just let the kids know, where did you go to middle school?
So I went to the Tenny in Methuen, and in fact, I had just moved to Methuen when I was in the 7th grade. So I was really getting to know everyone in the 8th grade as well. And so that was when I moved into that community, and it was a very interesting time. As you said, there were lots of ups and downs. It was a good year for the most part, but I remember having to really make new friends, etc. And so it was a time to, you know, really put myself out there and see what group I fit in with back then.
Oh, that's great.
You know what's a really fun fact, which is when Rep. Wynn realized how old I was, is that one of my friends from 8th grade, Brian Folks, we played in the NAMS band together, which we actually got to go to Disney World and march in the parade with the high school band. So that was pretty cool. But Brian Folks, who's still a friend of mine, is the band instructor at the Tenny. And he was Trom's band instructor at the Tenny when she was in 8th grade.
I never did band, but yes, chorus.
Oh, yes, chorus, yes, music instructor. So my 8th grade friend, yeah.
That's a full circle. That's a full circle journey.
That's right.
Life thing. So students, the reason why I like to do that is I just like you all to know that, you know, we were all 8th graders, okay? You might not think we were, but we were 8th graders, okay? So as your teacher, you know, I was an 8th grade, you know, person a long time ago, and then Christina and Trom, the same thing. So that's just an important thing that, you know, I always like to talk about with my guests. So the real topic today is, you know, it's kind of a heavy duty topic, but we're going to try to lighten it up a little bit. And that is women in government and women in civics. I think it's a really, really important thing. And I'm so happy that for this virtual season of Civics in Action, I have had 4 women come and one man, and the next guest, Town Manager Melissa Murphy Rodriguez, is going to also be on. And when I have the live ones as well, so many women coming in government. And just to let you all know, students, you may not know the civic actors in the town yet. You will get to know them well this year, but your 2 state representatives here are female, and then your town manager is also female. We do not have a mayor, and we can talk more about that later with Melissa. But what I want to just kind of throw out to both of you is I just want to throw out some questions, and you can handle one of these, a few of these, all of these, whatever you would like to do, because I think it's a really, really important thing. When I was in middle school, you know, I would always think of politician, white male, and that's changing, which I think is great. And part of the Harvard program that we're going to be doing this year is looking at civics from all perspectives, from all different groups, which is reflective of who we are as a community in NAMS and definitely amongst my students. So I'm going to start out with, I'll actually start out with Trom on this, and then we can go back to Christina. So the questions that I'd like you to address is, what does this statement mean to you, like when you hear women in government? I'm sure this is not the first forum you've been invited to talk about. Do you consider yourself a trailblazer, you know, trailblazer, or a person that's doing things for the first time, representing your group? What message would you have to young women who might want a career in government or civics that perhaps you did not hear when you were their age? So Trom, if you want to address any of those questions, all of them, a few of them, I'd love to hear your response.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the questions. I think it is actually very fitting that we are talking about women in government, especially this year. I'm sure some of you have heard we are just celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. And that's actually really exciting. But a couple of things to note is that even though this is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, this is mostly a celebration of the 100th anniversary for white women to vote, because Asian American women didn't actually weren't allowed to become citizens to then become voters until 1952. And in fact, we had to wait until 1965 for the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Act to go through for us to have better access to the polls for African American women. And there's still some districts like Guam and Puerto Rico where they still cannot vote in our federal elections. And so, yes, we are celebrating the 100th anniversary, but there's still a lot more to go. And why do I say that? When we're talking about representation at all levels of government, not just at the State House, it matters, because diversity is a value in and of itself, to allow for more robust conversations, to allow for more innovations. When you have different people at the table with different experiences, life experiences, and backgrounds, then you can have a more informed discussion. And so I think that that's why it's important for more women and other marginalized groups to have more of a voice in government. And so the exciting news is that this year, with all the special elections, Massachusetts has not ever gone past 30% women, but this year we finally did. And studies show that when you pass the 30% mark, more likely to have more women come into the fold, and that our numbers would increase more quickly. And so I'm excited that the legislature now, for the first time ever, is over the 30% mark. And that means a lot. That means that there will be more of us to have these very important discussions and work on issues that are not only important to women, but to families overall, issues that are near and dear to our hearts. And so for myself, I am the very first Vietnamese American woman ever elected into the legislature. So I guess you can consider me a trailblazer in that way, but I always tell folks that I am the first, but I don't want to be the only one. And I am committed to working to building a pipeline to get other women into the fold. There are still many more positions that we can encourage women to run for, to make sure that we have better representation. And some of the things that I'm hoping, especially for the young women, to hear is that, they say that it takes asking a woman 7 times to run for office before she would even consider. But I know for a fact that some young women never hear that at all. They have never heard from anyone to tell them to even consider this as a career path. So I want you to know that I'm asking you now to please consider that as one of many options that you have out there. I know you're in 8th grade. I know that there's a long way to go. There's your whole career ahead of you. And there are many choices that you can make, but be sure to remember that government work, civics, is so important. That's certainly an option for you if that's something you aspire to do. And don't let the naysayers discourage you from that. Make sure that they know that where your heart is, and that make sure people know that you're capable, and continue to have confidence in yourself, and lean on the people who support you so that you can get to where you want to be. And so I'll end there and hand it over to Christina.
Thank you, Trom. And before we get to Christina, Trom, I just want to, and I think I've probably shared this with you before, but maybe I haven't. But to the class, I'd like to just say that when Trom came in last fall, it was a very upbeat day. Her and Senator Diana DeZoglio came in, and it was a very upbeat day. And we talk about diversity and getting kids involved, and something to me very moving and touching happened. At the end of her presentation, I had about 3 or 4 Asian American students, young ladies, that were normally, it was towards the beginning of the year, so they weren't super outgoing, and they immediately rushed to Trom and talked to her, and it was a great moment, and they gave me feedback how nice it was to see someone like, I think the young lady said, someone that looks like me, which I thought was a very powerful statement. And it was just, I think that's what it's all about. And we're going to be trying to do that so much this year in the civics program and with the speakers. So that was just it was a really nice moment. I thought it was a really nice moment. And I think it'll be full of great moments this year as well. All right. So Christina, if you'd like to touch upon those, that would be great.
Sure. I really, a lot of what Trom was talking about, resonates with me, especially the needing to be asked 7 times to do this, because I probably was asked 17 times to do this. So despite the fact that this seat, though it looked a little different than it looks for me right now, was held by Donna Como. So it was held by a woman many, many years ago when I was a kid. Maybe actually I was probably I might have even been in 8th grade at the time, that this seat has been held by a woman in the past. And we do have a pretty long history of women in government in North Andover, which is, I always thought was kind of normal, but I'm realizing is actually somewhat rare. And so at least I was able to get over that hurdle of being like, well, okay, women can do this job, right? Because women do it. But being a mom of 3 kids, I was like, it is absolutely impossible. There's no way a mom can be a state rep. And I said that was like my biggest hurdle, was sort of mentally figuring out, is it actually possible for a mom? I'm just a mom, is what I would always say, to be a state rep. And what I've found is sort of like it's something that is not very common in the legislature or even at the federal level. We're lucky that we have Congresswoman Trahan, who represents just the neighboring towns. It represents Andover as well as Haverhill and Methuen and Lawrence, and she is a mom too. And so we bring a very different perspective because we're able to come and say, okay, well, we know what it's like when our kids are in school, and we know what it's like when schools aren't funded properly, and we know what the inside of a school like how the inside of school buildings work, which is just one piece. Or, we know what it's like to have a child with a learning disability, or to have, the mental health challenges of kids and all the different hurdles that our kids are going through today that maybe weren't the case in the 80s or the 90s when we were kids. So it's sort of a different perspective. But I do agree that one of the things that I've found important, and Trom and I have been sort of working on this on the side, is figuring out how do we encourage, especially women, but how do we encourage more women of color to get involved in government at the hyper local level, like not just in elected positions, but appointed positions. There are appointed positions all over the city. Like, can you be the town in our case, but can you get involved in the PTO? You see people do that, but there's also the planning board, or there's the board of health, or like I was on the master plan committee. Those are appointed positions or volunteer positions. They're not elected positions. And those are ways that you can really have an impact on the town at every level. And so while people say, well, I'm never going to run for state rep, or I don't want to run to be a congressperson, you can make a huge impact just being involved on the hyper local level and doing just little tiny things to move the town forward. Being part of the farmers market committee. These are all important things that make up the fabric of our community. And so we want diverse people to be involved in all aspects of civics, not just these these elected positions of some sort. So, I think that students being involved at the earliest level possible and making their voice heard, maybe they can't cast a ballot, but they can have their voices heard at every single level and become civic agents early. And so they can feel more comfortable. And I hope that, us being available people, like Trom and I and Senator DeZoglio, also a woman, but, we are always trying to make ourselves available to people where people congregate. So we're not sitting up on some pedestal, like we're just people and we're here in the community, and we try to make ourselves available to remind people that that they can do this too. That this is not some special position that is unattainable. We are regular people who love our community, who care about our community, who just want it to be a better place for people to live. And that's really all it takes to be a good elected or appointed official. So I think a lot of people in your class are going to feel that way.
That's great. Thank you very much. And, just as an aside, students, the first episode that you've already seen is with 2 young ladies, my former students, Caitlin Parks, who both my guests know very well, and then another student, Allison Dieterman. And Allison Dieterman is into the sciences, but she talked to you all about how valuable civics is. And Caitlin Parks obviously, talked about being the campaign manager for Representative Minicucci and interning for Congressman Moulton. So, there's definitely other role models that we're going to be meeting, and for all students. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to just share a very quick picture. I decided to add this to the agenda at the last minute, just because I think it's a really, really important thing to talk about with the kids. And I am going to, I don't know, can you guys see that picture? No? Yes?
Yep.
Okay,
we
great.
can see it.
Great.
Yeah.
So students, obviously over the weekend, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is in this picture here, passed away. And I know that maybe a lot of you know who she was and her importance. It's definitely something that I think is really important that I really wanted to bring in. And I think Justice Ginsburg means so much to so many people. And so obviously, I know there's some controversies about her being replaced in the process, and I think we're going to leave that aside just for the discussion today, and we'll bring it back in class much later, I promise. But I just want Trom and Christina to just touch upon Ruth Bader Ginsburg and just touch upon some questions. Just who was she? And what did she mean personally to you, as an American, as a woman, whatever? And what do you think my students should know about Ruth Bader Ginsburg? What should they know about her? So Trom, do you just want to kind of share your feelings about Justice Ginsburg and talk about some of those things? Because I think it's really important we talk about it.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you brought this up. So I have been devastated, and I know Christina and I have been talking about this as well, about just what a loss it is for not only our country, but really the world. As an attorney, as someone who studied law, as someone who read decisions written by Justice Ginsburg, I am just, when we're talking about trailblazer, talk about one of the most wonderful, extraordinary trailblazers of our recent history. She's the second woman to ever be on the Supreme Court, just right after Sandra Day O'Connor. She has really led the way in terms of gender equality and making sure people even recognize what gender discrimination is. And I will always remember the story of her arguing maybe her second or third argument in front of the Supreme Court, in front of all white men on the Supreme Court, to let them know what gender discrimination even is, because at that time people didn't even believe that it existed. And that's such a powerful image in my mind as someone who was a young law student at the time, just thinking through of like how much courage that took for her to speak up on something that people just didn't know and weren't ready for, and how she has just been such she has just been so strong in her conviction to push that through all of these years on the Supreme Court, and what that means for us now to then take on that extraordinary legacy and move it forward. And so for me, she's truly someone that really opened up my eyes, and I hope that she would open up her the eyes of so many women out there, that you can achieve anything. Even during that time when so few women went to law school, never mind make it to become a judge, to then become a Supreme Court justice, is just such a powerful story that I hope that young girls especially would take into their hearts, to know that you can achieve everything, and you should aim for the stars, because if you put in hard work and you are committed into what you're doing, and you can get others to come along with you as well.
Great. Thank you, Trom, so much. That's great. I'm so glad you shared that with us. So, Christina, I'd love to hear your views. This is very timely. It just happened Friday. It's pretty raw for us right now, but just tell us a little bit about how you're feeling, and reach out to my students in terms of what you think is important that we should communicate to them as civics students and as Americans.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why she was such a compelling justice, or such a compelling figure, she's an icon, right? Is because she consistently turned everybody's views of what was right or what we knew, and just turned it all up on its head, right? Like, well, women can't do this. Well, yes, they can. And this is she was we were just talking about this yesterday because I'm a scout leader and now my girls are in Boy Scouts, which shows now Scouts, and I lead a troop of girls. And one of the things, all the girls are young girls, they're 11, 12 years old, they're all talking about how sad they were that she was gone. One girl on her water bottle had a sticker of Ruth Bader Ginsburg saying, women belong in all the places where decisions are made. And so when you think about an 87-year-old woman who is a justice, who holds that much star appeal to a young girl because of these statements of peace and justice and equality and inclusion and all of the things that we try to instill in kids, that's what she dedicated her life to, right? Like she said, okay, well, I can't be a justice. Guess what? I'm going to come back again. And I'm just going to keep coming back and trying until you accept me for who I am and realize what I bring to the table. And she didn't give up, right? She just kept pushing forward every time over every obstacle. And she's like, yep, I'm a mom. I have 2 kids, but I can still be a Supreme Court justice. Like, oh, I'm a woman, but I can still be a Supreme Court justice. And she always pushed her agenda of equality and fairness and inclusion, even in a way that didn't make people angry, but in a way that converted people's way of thinking. And I think that that's what was really so compelling about her, is that despite the fact that everyone always says I dissent, right? Because she would be in opposition of maybe what the standard was, she did it in a way that wasn't offensive to people. She did it in a way that said, wait, she's smart and she's thoughtful and she believes in all these things. Maybe there's something behind her position. And she made people think, and she always made people think, and she was able to convert people to her way of thinking, which I think was what gave her so much power. This little woman would get up and hold all this power, and again, hold all this credibility across all different walks of life. And what was very interesting to me, I was very sad. I was sort of like crying in a heap when I heard she was gone, because she's so iconic but so important to me, as like she was like the pillar of justice. I think she is the person who will always stand for what's right. And I was so sad. And I, of course, like all old moms do, they go on Facebook, and I found that it didn't matter who was speaking on, everybody had a connection. Every woman said, she made it okay for me to have my career. She made it okay for my girls to know that this is possible for them. And so I think that regardless of what end of the political spectrum people were on, women really see her as the person who set the stage for us to be in positions of power and not have, to be able to hold these positions of power and have it be okay. She normalized it, I guess. So, so she's going to be hard shoes to fill, I think.
Definitely. And I appreciate you sharing your sentiments as well, Christina. And students, I know we cover the judiciary branch and the Supreme Court later on in a future unit, but we will be definitely memorializing Justice Ginsburg, probably in a lesson or two. One thing in the DKP curriculum is we're going to be looking all year at change makers, and she was definitely a change maker, like someone like a John Lewis, and people that we're going to talk about. And we also want you to think of yourself, students, as change makers. And I know that's a very hard thing to do, but one thing that we're going to be doing throughout the year is getting you all ready for a civics action project that you're going to be doing in the spring that actually was mandated by law. That's something all 8th graders have to do. And we'll talk more about that later. But just to kind of get us all involved, we talked about my last guest on episode 2 was the Youth Center director, Rick Gorman. And I know you both know Rick well. And Rick talked about the Youth Center being a civic action project that actually young middle schoolers were the ones that helped Rick make that happen. And that episode is, I think we're trying to speak to you. So I think in our last item, our last agenda, because we're getting close to the end and it's going by really, really quickly. We're going to be asking students to pick issues or concerns of theirs and possibly connect it to some type of civic engagement. And I know I exposed you both to the 10 questions that the DKP came up with, and those different types of things. But just as one of the last things I'd like to talk about, either when you were kids in middle school or in high school, or something that you have personally witnessed as state representatives or as a lawyer, Trom, or other things. Can you think of an example of middle school, high school, or even elementary kids picking an issue or a concern that they were interested with and getting involved? We were lucky enough to have Allison Dieterman on, who was a middle schooler years ago, and she actually got us to completely revamp the courtyard. And that was her as a 6th, 7th, and 8th grader pushing for that. So I'm going to ask, and Trom, can you think of an example of someone, considered in their youth getting involved and taking something on through civic engagement, being a civic actor?
Absolutely. I think it needs to start early and start young. And you mentioned John Lewis earlier, who I don't think he knew. He started as a high school student going to these marches. Like, you never know where you're going to end up, because once you're in, you're hooked. I can assure you of that. So once you start on this path, you will not regret it. And for me, as someone who, of course, I've seen many other examples, but just very recently, I had an 8th grader, one of my constituents, who is very, very committed to recycling. And he reached out and he said, I'm so committed to recycling. I saw that there's a miniature bottle bill. I want to make sure that we tax those to make sure that people learn to recycle them, so that we're not collecting all of these nips that are all around. And he wrote testimony. He wrote an op-ed. He reached out to me as his state rep to ask me what he could do to help promote this bill. And I was able to take his testimony and submit it to the committee. And now he's continuing to work with me on this bill. So young folks can make change. Your voice should be heard, and we want to hear your voice. And so that's just one example of many examples of young students who are engaged and want to get more involved. And I know that there are just so many other bills out there, whether it's environmental bills, gun reform bills, so many other things to increase equality and inclusion for everyone. And when we're talking about diversity earlier too, diversity of age is a thing. We know that the average voter is much older, but why is that? Why aren't younger folks getting more involved? And I'm so encouraged and inspired to see the young folks who are out there for all these marches and fighting for the right things. And I want to be there with them to encourage that type of civic engagement.
That's great. That's excellent. And you mentioned John Lewis, and I just wanted to let my students know that every once in a while I'm going to kind of do enriching things. So this is a book that I'm just going to give a shout out to. It's called March, and it's a graphic novel, and it's 3 books, and it's all about John Lewis and the civil rights movement. But it's definitely John Lewis actually helped write it with 2 other authors. And students, this is definitely something that, again, I highly recommend because it's great to talk about John Lewis being so young. I know most of us only think of him as an older gentleman, so that's a really, really important thing that we need to think about. So Christina, do you want to talk a little bit about civic engagement and kids being young and getting involved? Trom's story was excellent. I'd love to hear one from you.
Well, I'm going to give you an interesting fun fact, but when I was in a middle school, there was basically you had to be appointed. There were 10 of us, but we were appointed by the teachers to be leaders in North Andover Middle School. And we traveled around the state to meet with other civic leaders that were doing similar things in their schools. And we learned like how to make change in our school. And we decided to build a school store in one of the cafeterias. So the walls are still there, but it doesn't run as a store anymore. But we went to all the students and were like, what sorts of things are missing? And they wanted to have a store so that they could buy pencils and erasers and snacks and stuff like that. So we did all the fundraising, and we built a school store in the North Andover cafeteria, in the middle school cafeteria. So that was a kind of fun civic action project, I guess, that I did when I was at NAMS. But I would say that I would agree with Trom. I get lots of, students who reach out to me and say, I feel like I don't have a voice. I feel like everybody's making decisions and I'm not old enough to vote yet. So I'm not old enough to be a part of this process. And I would say, nope, you're never too young to be a part of this process. And, in committees that we sit on, we see young folks take days off of school to come in and testify in front of committees about things that are important to them. I have a child who's allergic to nuts and he carries an EpiPen, and allergies is very serious to him. There's a pending bill about that. I said, write testimony, write your story about what it's like being a kid with an allergy and how it scares you to think you might, when you were in elementary school, that the only person in the school who could deliver that EpiPen was the nurse. That's scary for kids, thinking like, what if the nurse is in the bathroom or on a break and they can't get to me? We had another student actually from Andover who came in and was speaking about having diabetes and pending legislation that was written on behalf of this student about allowing making sure that all teachers in the school knew about what it was like to be a type 1 diabetic and to be able to administer medication in the classroom if necessary. And then my daughter we had a day off from school on a school day where I went into the State House, and she came in with me and I said, while you're here today, you're going to do all the things. You're going to come around with me and you're going to pick a bill, and I want you to write a piece of testimony. And she came in and she went to a couple of the hearings or a couple of the briefings, and she said, I'm going to write about plastic bags because plastic bags kill the environment and kill wildlife. And she wrote a piece of testimony. And we take testimony from anybody. We don't just take testimony from the voters, because we're not here just to represent voters. I say this to people all the time. Our job is to represent now about 49,000 people we each have in our district. We're here to represent all of you. So every one of you sitting in this classroom right now I'm either your rep or Trom is your rep, and we are here to represent you, not just your parents who have the ability to vote or your neighbors, but we're here to represent all of you. And so we want to hear from you, and we love it when students come to us with ideas that we can help move legislation forward. We can help you. And we're always happy to help people write testimony, which we do for adults as well as kids. So, because we want to hear from people on how these pieces of legislation will impact you. So it's never too young to be a civic agent.
And that's great. And I think, one of the steps of the 10 questions to be a change maker is, finding allies. And, and I think students, you have 2 allies right here. And, Rick talked about him being an ally, and your principal and your teachers, and finding allies. And, when you both talk about, young people and testimony, one of your colleagues, State Representative Andy Vargas, he's going to tell us he's going to tell you students an amazing story. I'm not going to tell you the story right now, but it is an amazing story of a journey from him being a high schooler, rapping and listening to hip hop, and we'll tell more about that later, to him becoming a state representative and the journey that he had. And he's going to tell that story with you. And also, he gave us students last year the opportunity to testify on a bill, and that bill was lowering the voting age. Should we lower the voting age? And for me, I was very naive. I thought I was going to have 100% of my students saying, I'm in. That was not the case. We definitely had a dissent. We definitely had kids that were not into this, and they were able to present it, and they did it orally to Andy, and then they also did it in written form once we went into the remote model. And we even talked to one of his colleagues, Senator Bruce Tarr, who you both know, who is not in favor of the bill. So they got to hear both sides. So students, those are just some cool things that you can look forward to. So I think we're pretty much at the end, but what I'd like you both to have an opportunity to is just, you're probably going to be back again throughout the year, but this is not goodbye, but just wish my students well. I think my students right now, whether it's because I've been with them remote and hybrid and those types of things, and this is going to be a class that is so different than anything they've ever done before. This is not a social studies class. This is not a history class. There's no textbook. So a lot of them are looking at me like, what is this? So if you would just like to, based on what you saw last year, and I know that, Christina, you have perspective because of your son, but if you just like to talk about, wish them well and kind of talk about the class and some things that they can expect. And then I'll let you both sign off that way. So Trom, if you'd like to just have some closing remarks to my students, and then we'll let Representative Minicucci do it as well.
Great. Yes, absolutely. So I know that this year is so different for many reasons. I know that it is hard to be in a virtual setting, but you have an amazing teacher here who, as I'm sure you have witnessed already, has gone above and beyond for you. And even him talking about the classes, I want to be in this class to hear this discussion with Rev Marcus and Senator Tar. I mean, we see that in the State House as well, but I would love to see the kids' reaction to that. But as you've heard, this is a very interactive class. You're not only going to learn about history, but you're also going to learn about skill sets that you can apply to the everyday world and how you can continue to be civic agents as you get older, and even now as 8th graders. And I think that this is an amazing opportunity for you to absorb all this and to really reflect on the skill sets that you should hone through this classroom to make sure that you continue to stay engaged. And I know you can do it. I know it's hard, but we're here as allies. We're here to listen, and we want to work with you. So whatever skill sets, whatever lessons you learn from here, please apply, and please apply to real life, and please come to us, and we'll help you put that into action. So I look forward to coming back, and I know that you'll do well in this class. And thank you again, Mr. McGravy, for giving us this opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much, Trom. I really, really enjoy your involvement with everything. So thank you. All right. So Christina, would you like to just, close things up?
Well, I know you're going to have a great year because exactly like Trom, I said, I want to be in this class. This is the coolest class ever. You're getting the type of educational style that you won't see again probably till college. So it's kind of neat to be able to sit in a classroom and have discussions about topics that maybe you've never thought of before, and there'll definitely be differing views. And I love that you will learn how to have these discussions and have differing opinions in a very respectful way. And it's good to be learning it now as 8th graders, because we know that and you probably see it in your own lives, that you sometimes see adults not being super respectful and having raised values. So what I really like about this class is learning how to talk about hard topics in a way that's respectful and fun too, which is actually the most interesting part. I know that my son would always be like, boy, that was the shortest class ever. We were just getting into it, and I'm so sad that class is over, because he always wanted these classes to be twice as long, because he always enjoyed the discussions. He enjoyed the information that he was learning. And then the speakers. And I got to come to Rep. Vargas's, one of his speeches or one of his classes, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed listening to his story, and also, like you, Mr. McGravy, I thought everybody would want it to be 16 years old, but it was really interesting to hear the differing perspectives. So I think you're going to have a lot of fun, and you're going to learn knowing you're learning, which is the best part of that. That makes a good class in my mind, is when you come away and you've learned a lot. You don't even realize you're in class, and you're probably all going to wish that this class lasted even longer than it did. So, and I'm excited to see your civic action projects in the spring, because I know we'll be invited along to check them out, I'm sure. So
that's definitely going to happen. So Trom and Christina, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your weekend to be here for my students. And students, you can definitely look forward to seeing this video in its entirety. There's going to be a follow-up lesson. You're not just going to watch the video. There's going to be a follow-up lesson that I'm going to share with both Trom and Christina, where you're going to be doing reflections, and there is going to be a product that you're going to create as well. So when we do these talks, it's not just you watching something on YouTube. There's going to be definitely a follow-up with you. So episode 3, this was a great one. I really, really appreciate it. And both my guests, thank you so much. I wish you both the best. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you. Take care. Bye.
All right, great. Thank you.